we're still painting this broad picture where when Yeshua is describing his return, all of humanity falls into two camps. One camp that is clueless, that is in the dark, that's children of the darkness, that knows not the day or the hour, that is carrying on as business as usual, and they will be judged. They will be eventually sent off into destruction. There's some more parables we're going to look at where the wicked are likened to plants that are known as tares that are gathered together and thrown into the fire. There's another analogy that we're going to look at here in a moment where the wicked are likened to fish that are not good. When you're out fishing, you draw up this big net of fish, and there's some good fish and there's some bad fish, and you throw the bad stuff back out into the ocean, but you keep the good stuff. So there are different parables that give us the same picture of a separation. Eventually, if we were to continue through Matthew 25, he gives us the separation of the sheep and the goats, and the sheep are the blessed on the right hand, and the goats are the wicked on the left hand. And the sheep go into the kingdom and inherit the kingdom prepared for the righteous, and the goats inherit judgment. So either way, it's the same picture over and over again of this separation of good from bad. There's no in-between kind of people where you're riding the fence going, well, I'm not quite good, but I'm not quite bad. Doesn't work that way. All right, let's look now at the parallel passage in let me look at there we go. Mark 13 real quick, and then we'll jump backwards into, and then we'll look at Luke, and then we'll jump backwards into Matthew for some more details. But I want to read the parallel passages first. So in Mark 13, speaking of things to come, I backed up to the beginning of the chapter where we can see that this is a question from his disciples about the temple, and then Yeshua goes into this idea about, well, all of these things are these stones are going to be thrown down, and he's going to be talking about all the what we call the beginnings of birth pangs in this chapter. I'm just kind of scrolling through it. You can kind of scan with your eyes. I'm not reading on purpose. But notice he's giving events that will give those who are in the light, those who are true believers, those who are faithful servants of God, enough warning to know that events are preceding the monumentous event known as the day of the Lord, which is also which will precede the second coming of the Lord. So, in other words, the day of the Lord is judgment, but the day of the Lord is also the rescue of the righteous and the establishment of the kingdom of God eventually. So the details that we're looking at right here have already been read over in Matthew chapter 24, which is why I'm just going through them somewhat quickly. You can see this is the parallel account. But what I want to jump down to is starting in verse 14, which is the midpoint of the week. Yeshua says, right, the midpoint of the 7 years. Now, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. I'm starting in verse 14 of Mark 13. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Verse 15, whoever is on the hill housetop must not go down and nor go in to get anything out of this house. And whoever's in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. And then he starts talking about the same details that we just read about in Matthew. But woe to those women who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Moreover, pray that it will not happen in winter, for those days will be such a time of tribulation has not occurred since the beginning of the creation, which God created until now and never will again. Which is odd. Again, does that sound like business as usual to you? Well, certainly not for Israel, all right? And yet, Yeshua says, people will be eating and drinking, get marrying and giving in marriage, and it was just like it was in the days of Noah, right up until the day. So on the one hand, there'll be, business as usual in the world, and yet on the other hand, all hell will be breaking loose around everybody. And then starting in verse 20, and if the Lord had not shortened those days, which days? Daniel says there'll be 1260 days for the Antichrist reign, 1290 days before the Antichrist is destroyed, and then another 1335. Let me pull up the little chart to make sure I'm getting the time frames there. 1335 days until the rule of Christ is set up. And yet Yeshua says, if those days had not been shortened. Daniel's prophecy makes nonsense if Yeshua says, I'm just going to shorten everything. If it's not really 3.5 years of the second half of the week, if it's not really a full 7 years, like a tribulation model, if Yeshua shortens either the 1260, the 1290, or the 1335, then why even give those details to Daniel? Okay, we can reconcile this seeming contradiction. Actually, if we go back to, where's one of the other charts? If we go back and look at this chart, we can see it's 3.5 for 3.5 for the overview of the 7. And then cut right down the middle is the abomination of desolation that I just read about. That's the midpoint. And yet right on the chart, the next event that takes place is the Great Tribulation. And then reading from left to right, from the blue to the yellow, the Great Tribulation is cut short by what? The day of the Lord commencement. So that, which is also the rapture/resurrection, that is the cutting short, where Yeshua says, unless those days were cut short. What are those days? What are those days that he's referring to? I believe he's referring to the Great Tribulation, which is cut short. In other words, it's interrupted by the day of the Lord, which commences, which transitions from what we would describe as the wrath of Satan in the Great Tribulation, wrath of the Antichrist, wrath of Satan in the Great Tribulation, which transforms into, or it's cut short by the day of the Lord, the rapture, the second coming, the resurrection, which then transitions into the day of the Lord, which is the wrath of God. So that's why Yeshua said those days would be cut short. So unless the Lord had not shortened those days, i.e. the days of tribulation, not the days of the 70th week itself, but just the tribulation itself, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, which is Israel, on the natural end, but Christians on the spiritual end. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then verse 21, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and will provide signs and wonders in order to mislead, if possible, the elect. But be aware, I've told you everything in advance. And then I'm going to skip past a little bit of this dialogue here. I thought it was right at the point where I wanted it to, but I was wrong. It's actually starting down in verse 28. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. Again, you've got to look at these parables, and there's quite a number of them. We've got the parable of the fig tree. We've got the parable of the 10 virgins. We've got the parable of the owner of the vineyard. We've got the parable of the Noah's, as it was in the days of Noah, which isn't really a parable. It's a reference back to a story. But the point is, all of these are given to help us understand that on the one hand, we've got wicked humanity that is clueless as to what's going on, and on the other hand, we should have faithful, the faithful elect, who should be not clueless. They should be in the know. They should be watching the warnings. They should be looking at the signs. They should be aware of the urgency of the hour. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and sprouts its leaves, you know the summer is near. By the way, he didn't say that based on a parable of a fig tree, you'll know that summer is imminent. Rather, he knows that summer is near. We say imminent. Imminency up to a point. Yeah, and we'll talk about this when we get to rapture later on. But yes, at some point in time, imminency will kick in, but only after all the other previous events have unfolded. So you too, verse 29, when you see these things happening, recognize he is near, right at the door. Then verse 29 is imminency, right? He's right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Verse 31, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. And then we have this parable about the man who's on a journey, and also another parable about people having a thief break in. If they'd have known when the thief was coming, they would have been alert, and they wouldn't have allowed the thief to break in. So all of these parables kind of point in the same direction about be ready, but it's the world at large that isn't going to be ready because they don't hear the voice of God. But by contrast, we who are his true followers should hear his voice. So that's the end of Mark's parallel. Now let me jump over real quick to Matthew 13. He's got this parallel that he gives not at the same time as the Olivet Discourse that we read about in Matthew 25 and Mark 13 and Luke 17 and 21. Instead, it's a parable that's given to his disciples and the crowds in general, but it fits in with the theme of the second coming of Christ, his return. Notice this. This is starting in Matthew 13, starting in verse 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. He just gave this parable about the weeds of this parable of the sower and weeds seed is sown by a sower, and part falls one place, and then another part falls another place, and then this enemy comes and sows tares or weeds among the wheat, so that both end up growing up together. And so that's, I don't want to read down through the parable, it's earlier up in the chapter. I just want to read where Yeshua gives the interpretation to his disciples. Remember, we also have a separation here. Whenever he's talking to the crowds in general, he speaks in parables. And like when he speaks to the Pharisees, he gives these parables that confuse them because they don't have ears to hear and eyes to see. They're in stubborn rebellion. They don't really want to know the truth, even though they ask questions of Yeshua, like, when's the kingdom going to come? And he just says, the kingdom's not going to come in signs that you're going to be able to tell. It's the kingdom's in your heart, right? This is earlier in this particular chapter as well, I believe. And so he kind of leaves them in confusion mode because of the hardness of their heart. But when the disciples turn to him and say, Lord, tell us what this means, he tells them, and he tells them why. It's because you've been selected, you've been chosen to know the secrets of the kingdom. To you it's been given these this privilege because your hearts are in tune with my voice, and you hear my voice, and you listen, and you follow after me. Therefore, I'm going to tell you the meanings of these parables. But otherwise, to everyone else who doesn't have an ear to hear and eyes to see, they're just going to get the parables, and they're going to walk away scratching their heads. So Yeshua breaks down the parable, starting at verse 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. And he does. He says, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, meaning Yeshua, and the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one. Verse 39. And the enemy who sowed them, let's go like this so you can guys see where I'm going. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is, you ready for it? The end of the age. And the reapers are the angels. So we know the context now is the same slice of history that we're examining in our own studies, which is eschatology, the end time events. And then he says in verse 40, so just as the weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, it's the wicked, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness. And they will be thrown into the furnace of fire. And in that place, Yeshua says, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So they're thrown into hell, basically. Then he says, the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The one who has ears, let him hear. So, he goes on to talk about another parable about the kingdom's like a hidden treasure, the kingdom's like a costly pearl, the kingdom's like a dragnet. And we'll look at this dragnet one as well, just real quick. This one. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet which was cast into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. Notice you bring up all these fish, but not all of them are good. Verse 48, and when it was filled, they pulled it up on the beach, speaking of this net, and they sat down and did what? Gathered the good fish into containers, but the bad they threw away. So it will be at the when? End of the age. Same time frame as what we just read earlier. The angels will come forth and remove the wicked from among the righteous, and then they will and they will throw them in the furnace, and in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, those are the end of the parables that I want to highlight. Now, where am I going with us looking at these parables and looking at how is it relevant for our Matthew passage? Well, going back to Matthew, where he's talking about that there'll be two in the field, one will be taken, one will be left, two grinding the mill, one will be taken left. We're simply talking about a separation of the good from the bad. Eventually, what I want to get into, and I realize I'm running out of time to do it tonight, so I'll just give you a little bit of a teaser. We're going to talk about this idea, who is left and who is taken. I've heard, and I've seen this on the internet all over the place, it's in YouTube videos, that when Yeshua said, for just as it was in the days of Noah before they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood, you ready for this? Took them all away. Because Yeshua says in the English, took them all away, which is Matthew 24:39. And this word took shows up the same way in most versions. Although I turned over to the Matthew and the Mark. Did I read the... here we go. I didn't read the Luke passage, so let's take the last 3 minutes and read this. In the Matthew passage, he says in verse 39, and they, speaking of the wicked people, they didn't understand until the flood came and took them all away. And then in verse 40, he says, 2 men will be in the field, one will be, highlighted here, taken, and one will be left. And then in verse 41, it says, 2 women will be grinding the mill, and one will be taken, and one will be left. So 3 times in the English, we have from verse 39, 40, and 41, we have some variants, some version of the word take or taken or something to that effect. And so I've heard Bible teachers say, this is proof from verse 39 that the taken are not the righteous, but the taken are instead the wicked. Because in the example with Noah, it is the wicked who are said to be taken in judgment, and therefore the righteous are ones that are remaining, right? Noah and his family, they are the ones that are left behind, whereas the wicked are taken in judgment. And therefore, using that context in verse 40 and 41, when he says 2 people will be in the field, one will be taken, these same Bible teachers go on to say that the taken one is the one taken in judgment, and the one left behind is the one who's the righteous. And the 2 women at the mill, the one taken is the one taken in judgment, and the one left behind is the one left in left for blessing and for to inherit the kingdom. And I thought about that, and it seems like that's a pretty solid case when you take it in the English. But we run into problems when we look at the Greek, and we also run into problems when we look at the parallel passage in Luke in the English. So let's turn to that for a second. We won't finish this tonight. Second coming foretold, starting in verse 20 of Luke 17, right here. Now he was questioned by the Pharisees. So this time it's not by the disciples. He's questioned by the Pharisees to when the kingdom of God was coming. And notice, because of the hardness of the heart, and because he can sense that many times they're asking trap questions they don't really want to know, he says, the kingdom of God is not coming with signs that can be observed. And yet, in reality, it is coming with signs that can be observed. But he gives them a cryptic answer because they're not really ready to hear the truth anyway. He just leaves them in the dark. It's not coming with signs that can be observed. And the idea is that how can Yeshua be right here and yet be right when he talks about disciples and talks about all these signs and the coming kingdom? It's because there's 2 aspects to the kingdom. There's the physical kingdom that is going to be returning with the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ. That's the physical kingdom. But along with that, and maybe even more importantly, and he tells this part, at least to the Pharisees, there's a spiritual kingdom. And he says it in the final half, he says, the kingdom of God is not coming with signs that can be observed. Verse 21, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there it is. For behold, were you ready for it? The kingdom of God is in your midst. Meaning it's in you. It's here. I'm the kingdom of God, and my disciples and my followers, we're the kingdom. We make up the kingdom. The kingdom is right here, and he's the one talking to you. The king of the kingdom is right in front of your face. They didn't see it because of their hardness of heart. So there's the physical kingdom that will be seen with observable signs, but then there's the spiritual kingdom, which didn't come with signs in the way that they were looking for it. So that's kind of a side note. But in closing to our study, he talks about to the disciples, and we'll read this and we'll leave it off with a cliffhanger tonight. He says to disciples in verse 22, the days will come. Let me scroll past this. Let me start in verse 26 there for sake of time. And just as it happened in the days of Noah, so here's our parallel with the Matthew passage. Just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. People were eating, they were drinking, Yeshua says, they were marrying, and they were being given in marriage. So he's describing the general affairs of the day of people not being aware that there's this impending judgment. Right until same details until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Did you catch it? Earlier in Matthew said the flood came and took them all away, using the verb took. But here it doesn't use the word took. It says the flood came and destroyed them all. So it's a different verb, but it's the same judgment. That it's the wicked who are being judged, but it simply says the flood came and destroyed them. So we can't build this case on the word took just because it shows up in the English in Matthew, because the word took for Noah is not mentioned in the Luke passage. And then he goes on to give second example. Well, you know what? I'm not going to read that one. Let's stop right there at verse 28, because he's going to give another analogy about Lot. And it's a separation from of the wicked from the righteous. And we're going to begin to see, and I'll tip my hand just a little bit, we're going to begin to see that God can and does rescue the righteous from the area of destruction, and yet pours out that judgment on the wicked by not rescuing in them from the location that the judgment is being poured out. That's a bit of a clue as to what he means by taken and left, and we don't have to get tripped up by the English words taken like they show up in Matthew 25. But we'll stop there. We'll pick this up again next week, where we're trying to understand this idea of the beginning of the day of the Lord. So I'll give you one chart again real quick. Let's find it. This chart works for me. The blue parts on your chart are the wickedness of humanity is poured out on just the general sense of humans, judgment that is in the sense of the beginnings of birth pains at the first 3.5 year part of the 70th week. And then as we tip over into the midpoint, the great tribulation kicks off, where it's the wrath of Satan, the intense hatred of the Antichrist against Jewish people and believers. And that commences at the beginning of the second half of the week. But that is interrupted by the wrath of God that's poured out not just on humanity, but is poured out on the Antichrist beast kingdom. So there is a stark difference between the wrath of Satan and the wrath of God. And there should be, because of the recipients of who receives the wrath, but also because of whose wrath is being identified. So that's what we're talking about this separation. What happens to the righteous? Are they supernaturally preserved during the wrath of God, or are they taken out of harm's way before the wrath of God is poured out? We'll begin to turn to those topics next week, but that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end time events.